So, what were funerals and weddings like during hyperinflation? And the biggest difference that I can say it was that it did not cost a lot of money like now it does. And it was weird for me to see Western movies, right? These, movies were like romantic comedies, whatever, later on that came through into Romania, that, the father-in-law, the will-be father-in-law is like spending such an amount of money, the elegance, the big tents, the all the ornaments, everything. Well, it wasn't like that at all. We did not have the money for it. Nobody had the money for it, so nobody even expected that. It was simple, there might have been many people I know, especially in um, Romanian families, right? Many people invited, but still the cost was kept down in the sense of there was, we had a cultural house usually per small town. It was sort of the place was built by the townspeople, right? And if you had a bigger wedding that you couldn't do at your house, then you would just go there. It wasn't the nicest place, It was probably half built during communism, maybe finished during hyperinflation, and it was just the place where you would go, right? And everybody just went there, and if you didn't have tables, you brought your own. If you didn't have food, you brought your own. Usually food was okay, but it was simple. It was natural, simple people getting together, celebrating stuff, or mourning, I guess, in case of a funeral. But it was simple. It was okay, you got your best clothes, right? The ones that didn't have holes in it, hopefully. And it was very simple. I remember as a kid that, just nothing special in the sense, well, it was more about the customs. It was more about what you have to do for if you are the bride, or if you're becoming a husband. It was more about, okay, now this part comes and we have to do this. Now we have to do that dance. Now we have to do something with the wine. Now we have to do something. Oh, look, the shoe got stolen, right? So it was more about these traditional gameplays of what happens, right, during a wedding. And yeah, so it was simple and it was nice. To be honest, I liked that better. And my wife and I had also very quote unquote simple wedding, in the sense of it wasn't extravagant, Nobody went into debt, let's just say that way. And we liked it. So um yeah, it was simple. You improvised. So for the things you could not provide, you would improvise, and people um helped you along, let's say. The guests were not too picky about how things look or how things feel. But I think it became a business now. So now, even in Romania, like, it's becoming more and more of a business. It's becoming huge, and in my opinion, waste of money. Yeah. So the marriage should be beautiful, not necessarily the wedding. That's um, anyway. So the funerals, when I look at, or hear about prices in the news for stuff in the United States, it's mind-boggling why it why somebody needs to spend that much money on, a wooden casket to be lowered in the ground. It's absolutely crazy. And it was mostly funded by the church, and the church was funded by the community. And again, nobody went into debt um, to achieve anything. It was just simple and over, I guess. Um, I would think if you can. go to other countries beyond Eastern Europe now, maybe Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, who knows? I don't know. But I bet you would see a very different culture where these events have a different type of meaning instead of showing something off, right? It's more about how what's expected of you to do at certain periods, I guess, in your life. Okay, another question. Was there any movement by citizens to just rid themselves of central bank and its money printing exercise? No, there was none. In the sense, many people did not even understand just how today many people don't understand what's Benoit. I think that's how you pronounce your name, Benoit. Divorce is even more of business. I bet it is. Um, I hope I got your name better this time. So, was there any movement by the citizens to just rid themselves of central bank and its money printing exercise? No, because many people were ignorant of the fact of why things are happening, right? To some degree, even my family or many people in my family did not quite understand why this was happening. We just understood from a gut feeling that you don't want to keep cash because it's getting devalued. But who's devaluing it? Contrary to public opinion, you are devaluing it. It's not the central bank who's devaluing it. They are just printing more, but you yourself are devaluing it because you see more and more of it, right? With different numbers on it. And you doing your own math, right? That you cannot afford things next time. Now you have to raise your own price. So the people are devaluing it in the sense the value is up in your head, right? The problem is that the central banks think that you're too dumb. But dumb people figure it out too, in the sense that it's being devalued by the population, but they don't necessarily understand that that is an effect that was caused at the central bank. So usually many people, I mean, if you go down to Los Angeles downtown, right? Or Santa Monica or any town USA, how many people knew, especially before Ron Paul happened, right? How many people knew about the central bank, what its functions are, what it's doing, how it's robbing your purchasing power? Many people did not even know, yeah. So, but they did feel that government was at fault, right? But they thought it was a natural progression of the communist government falling. So now, because we have no government, that's why the money is being inflated away, or nobody wants our money. Which, if we kind of round it out, that's not exactly not the case, because not having a government, it just felt like not having a government. We had from a very conservative, and you do have to understand this, like meanings in my head for words are a bit different than the USA, where the meanings are put together by the media for you. But we had a conservative communist conservative communist government, which became a liberal capitalist government, which felt like no government. So many people just thought that this was kind of an effect of going to a no government situation. And they blamed the old government, not necessarily the new government, who was continuing the same printing process that the previous failing communist government was doing. I don't know if you understood that, but people knew it was a function of government, but they not did not necessarily understand how the central bank was deflating the value of the currency. or inflating the currency. So no, but they were not happy with the government, I can tell you that, and to the point where government had very limited power during those times, precisely because people did not want to be governed anymore. So the commenter says, I read about situations such as Weimar Germany and Lebanon where there was or is actually a raging, publicly visible, affluent social scene, while the vast majority of the population lives in poverty and resentment. Was there a case in Romania as well during hyperinflation? Yeah, very good question. So I guess the question continues: in Romania, did those living in the city ever get together in mobs and raid the countryside? Okay, that's a different question. So the first question is, I guess, the big difference between those who are live at a higher echelon of affluent, so live at affluent social scene, and the very poor. And that was the case, but it was it was a bit different because we had that during communism as well. So we had that during communism as well, but it was more who you were related to or what type of political structure you fit in and how good you were towing the party line, which unfortunately now we're reverting back to if you take a look at US politics or the US media, especially how some people in media are very rich, and that's only a function of how well they toe the line, right? How well they perform to be mouthpieces for whoever they are mouthpieces for. So that was the case during communism, right? That was definitely the case. So you would have this very wealthy echelon of people, but it was understood that it was sort of like an aristocracy, which a new aristocracy that formed during communism prior to the previous era, the real aristocracy. So we had that, but now things were shifting as some of these old communists became capitalists, and now they suddenly became factory owners, right? Well, how did they become factory owners, right? Well, because as they were having a fire sale, they were the closest to the kitchen, I guess, and they were the ones who picked everything up at pennies, micro pennies on the dollar, let's just say that. So now the new aristocracy, which is a capital, which became, I guess, especially in Russia, which was even worse than in Romania, one could say, was the oligarchy, right? The oligarchy was forming. So it's it's a more complex than just hyperinflation, because when we talk to people in Venezuela, right, and she was saying that that is still there, right? The capital city in Venezuela lives a totally different reality than the countryside in Venezuela, right? There you have hotels, lavish lifestyles, and everything else, whereas in the countryside, poverty reigns. So that is a different hierarchy. So the criteria of the hierarchy is different, but the end effect is the same. So we went something like there was in Venezuela to more of a Russian type oligarchy system. And as things loosened up, where you did not necessarily have to toe the party line anymore or have the right opinion to fit into the structure, but it was more of how well you can sell your country out to Western influence. It was it was a bit different. So people who used to live in poverty during communism, or let's just say they were paper pushers during communism, not necessarily a very high standard of living, but just kind of important on a role, they could live with their role as paper pushers to get closer to sell out the country faster, and they would get propelled ahead very fast based on the roles that the Western government saw them in as they were coming in, reforming the system. So because of that, they got pushed very high up very fast, and people did resent them. People resented the old communist higher ups for one reason, and these newly found wealthy people who they resented them for a different reason. But at first, because of hyperinflation, the poverty was so immense that there was no repercussion because nobody could do anything against that while they had the chance. And after maybe 5 7 years, when you could have repercussions for doing illegal stuff, by that time the court system and everything was so settled in the new system that you could not get from point A to point B, and that was it. So I would say many people just stayed that way. Yeah, there were efforts, I know, in Hungary to kind of find like corruptions and what to do about the people who took advantage of the country or took advantage of their fellow people, but they had very limited fruit, I would say. But that was definitely the case. The only in countries with a big, wide middle class and freedom of speech, especially, you can have a level of prosperity where you think that that's for granted, and then you lose it, and then you find out that that was something very special you had. All right, so let's take a look at some questions from the chat. Okay, so let's start with some screenshotted questions. Zuma asks in the previous chat, how does one protect himself from the coming collapse? I mean, yeah, what aspect of it? I guess I need to send the question back to you to be more precise, but basically try to be as self-sufficient as possible and try to be away from bad locations as much as possible. If you keep these two, then I think you'll do better than the rest. Is it possible to profit? He asks. And yes, of course, because if you're prepared and people are not prepared, then you can sell your preparedness to them during that point when they are forced to sell equipment, machinery, real estate, gold, whatever they have, in order for get food for every day, So yes, immensely. You can, I mean, these are the times to change history for your family for the long run. You can immensely do profit here in these situations. How will CBDC impact this strategy? I think it will impact it because it's going to be different. But I believe that black markets will form very fast, and or free markets, because the CBDCs, in my opinion, the CBDCs role is a control system. It has nothing to do with money. We have digital currency already. You use it every time, as when you use a debit card. You can pay me right now through buymeacoffee.com. So it is a control system disguised as money or new money, whatever. And That's the whole reason that they need to put it in, because when this situation happens, they don't want you to profit. They want the system to continue as before. That's the control system. Will gold become illegal to own or very difficult in Europe? Um, I mean, you have to take a look at the trajectory your country is in, and kind of do some estimates based on that. But my guess is yes. We have seen this again and again, that gold has become illegal in totalitarian governments, and there's no reason why they would not want to do that. Um, or it would be limited, I would say. Um, but that should not necessarily hold you back, because just um, there's always room. Even during communism, when gold was highly illegal, if you actually had gold, you were probably doing okay. Okay. What about silver? I would say you need silver as well. Probably it might be, in some times it will be more useful than gold. Silver doesn't really have that history in Europe of being illegal, although usually that silver is either junk silver or silverware or something like that. So there was a huge secondary market for silverware and other stuff during and prior hyperinflation, even during communism, and people used it as a store of value. Um, yeah, and it was easier to fill the gaps, let's just say, with silver. But for long, I don't know, for long term, if you want to weather the storm through these bad situations for multi generational wealth, I think for that, gold is maybe a different, in my opinion, in most cases from what I studied, maybe a different, maybe a better tool. But sometimes it's almost impossible to do business with gold during these times. Um, so he asks, will stocks be an inflation populism hedge? Um, I think usually that's how they are portrayed. Um, However, if we have a major collapse, in the sense of just the type of collapse the communist regime had, the Soviet regime had, I think it will become absolutely worthless. And that's an unpopular opinion. People have, whenever my first video came out, they were talking about what type of stocks for hyperinflation, and I mentioned that it can be a good um, hedge for high inflation, but not too high inflation, because stocks is a very capitalistic Western type of way of investing, right? Um, and it only works in free societies, when there's a rule of law and somebody oversees, and you trust the mechanism that oversees everything. Because if you really look into it, and I'm not going to give you too many clues, but you don't own any stocks. There's an entity in New York who owns stocks, and they owe you a promise that they will pay you something for it. So look it up. Um, and yeah, not even counting the fact that during hyperinflation, um, many companies, big companies, go bust because they cannot ride the waves of hyperinflation, unlike small companies that you may start and you manage, right? And look, I owned some stocks and I still own some. I'm not saying that sell your portfolio. I'm not an investment advisor, and don't take anything as an advice. I might buy all of it back tomorrow. I don't know. What I'm saying is that my opinion on stocks is different in a potential hyperinflationary collapse than what other experts say. And that's just my opinion from the past, from what I have went through or my family went through. Okay, more questions. Okay, if you do have questions, please tag me in the comment section, or just do a capital question, something, so I can spot them easily. Because it looks like you guys are having a conversation there, which is awesome. It's just harder for me to find your questions that way. So, sound is better now. Even bigger AI asks. I like that name. Um, okay, does it sound good? Is the sound quality good or not really? And I've been just talking to myself here. Okay, tell us how gold was traded. So, so gold was traded many different ways, but the most common one was traded as a currency, as a foreign currency. So as our currency was collapsing, the Romanian lei, people on known streets and known places appeared, and they were sort of exchange houses, what you would now call exchange houses. And usually it was some shady dudes having bodyguards, having local cops paid off, and everybody knew that these were the full four streets or places, or next to, usually next to market or marketplace, or in the far corner of it. You would go there and you would exchange something there, and you would go then and spend your money right there on the market before it loses further value or something like that. And you would store your money in foreign currency or gold or something of a value, and then you would exchange that on the market or close to the market or on the same day, and you would trade that. The issue here was that at first it wasn't safe, but it was quite like it was capitalism winning, in the sense that these once shady people soon realized that they can make so much good money on the trading fees that it would not be worthwhile for them to do any shady stuff. Just push up the fees. But if they pushed up the fees too high, then new people would appear, and compete against them, and it would push the fees down. So we had more and more of these streets and corners where you would go and you would trade. The problem was that you would never want to show high amount of gold or anything of value there. It was more for a daily purchase, right? Or a week purchase, or for something like that. And you would also want to not just go always to the same spot. You may want to swap it up or have randomness in it, right? But eventually, like if you would have some type of working relationship, like my father had with these, well, some people, eventually, then it would be very easy for them, right? And later on, even during hyperinflation, this became more and more legal and more not black market, just real stuff, because the need was there and you could not um, you could not enforce the law against it or the rule against it. So it was becoming culture, right? And culture um, pushes law, as you can see now with the current shifting culture in the United States. So culture, everything is downstream of culture, and if something become, that's why they call it culture wars and everything else. So it became culture, and it became something natural that you would do, and it became natural very fast, right? And it became safe and safe and safer to the point where it was being totally normal. So that was like the way how most people used it, right? That's how you would trade. But you would have to watch out because early on, like a few tips here, you would not want to show huge amounts. You would go there and you would go and, oh, you're selling your wedding band, right? So that's how, like, you would have like 10 fake wedding bands, right? And for every time you go there, oh, this is your wedding band that you're selling, or the next person, this is your wedding band you're selling. So that way nobody could conclude that you have more of these, right? Unlike if you would show up with coins or something like that. So that wasn't necessarily safe early on. Later on, it didn't really matter. Within the next 1.5, 2 years, I would say. But first, it would have been dangerous. So during that time, there were also purchases directly made for real estate. So you could trade it for real estate. So in this case, usually, in so real estate is good if you can hold it, right? But if you cannot hold it during hyperinflation, the relative value of real estate goes down because people don't really care too much about owning a nice property if they cannot feed themselves. So now what do they do with that money? It does purchase more than a bowl of soup. So how do you trade it for 200 bowls of soup, right? Or 1,000 bowls of soup? Well, you still, if you're smart enough now, at least now you would want to, during hyperinflation, and now at least you want to store something that holds its value. So you would rather directly trade it either for Deutschmark, which we had, right? The German mark that we traded for, or gold or silver. Well, not really silver, I guess. In our case, we didn't really have the culture for silver back then, but for gold. So you could do direct transactions and contracts for it, but usually it was bigger amounts, right? Because the value of the gold, the relative value of gold was that high. And if you haven't seen this or joined this channel for a long enough time, then just comparing the real transaction that we took part of, or my family took part of, was that around 15 grams of 18 karat gold chain bought you a 2.5 acre property. So that's less than an ounce of gold. So you could do direct transactions that way. When eventually banks came in, because we didn't have a bank, we just had the government bank. During communism, that broke into two pieces. Then a lot of foreign banks came in. Eventually, you could put your gold in there, get cash for that. Although it was a bad deal, so I don't know why would you do that, but like that was easy to do. There are many different ways how people dealt in gold. However, usually you wanted someone's advice on it because I wouldn't say fake was too big of an issue, but yeah, there were, let's just say, there were someone's advice or counsel that you would go to before you would deal in gold in bigger terms. Okay, do you think there will be a mass migration of US citizens out of the US looking for cheaper countries to live during retirement? I believe so. Yeah, I do think this might happen. However, this might happen only for a while. If the US dollar collapses completely, in the sense of losing its world reserve currency status, the US might become a very cheap country to live in compared to going somewhere else. Because now, I mean, you do have to keep these options in your head, because things might change fast. I'm not saying this is going to happen or this is going to happen at all or suddenly, but just looking at the news for the last, what, 2 weeks? Yeah, it's becoming more and more apparent that more and more countries that were quote unquote the biggest allies or allies of the United States are now having talks with China, even France, for goodness sake, even Macron. Um, it's becoming more and more apparent that we are becoming, and I hate this word or whatever, a multipolar world, but it is becoming more and more apparent that things are shifting, and they shift slowly until they shift fast. So it depends on what your retirement plan is right now and for the next, I don't know, couple of years. That seems to be the case, but I'm saying there might be a time where you cannot even go outside of the United States because it the money that you thought you could buy, like a nice property somewhere in Asia, you won't be able to do that anymore unless maybe you stored it in precious metals or you purchased the property now to have that plan for you. I mean, there's, yeah, I don't know. There's other YouTubers talking about this. I can't quite remember the name, but Nomad Capitalist or one of those YouTube channels. I hope I didn't just make that name up. But if you have some plans, you better formulate those plans fast. On what I'm saying. Thanks for your channel, Mike says. Thank you for your comment, Mike. I'm close to being out of debt. Thank you. Well, that's great. I think that's awesome, especially if you have variable rate debt, in the sense that they can change the debt rate on you fast. You should get get out of it as soon as possible. Now, if you have companies that you have structured the debt for fixed rate and you want to play the inflation game, that's different. But as a personal debt, non-producing debt, it's horrible. And one of the best lessons I got from my father not to go into debt, and I've kept it. So I'm just sometimes I'm thinking about the citizens of the United States and how indebted they are, and it must be horrible. So good for you. That's why, like, I don't agree on everything with Dave Ramsey, but I really do appreciate the level of effort that he does to get people out of debt, and it's working, right? All right, Benoit. And those who toe the party line high up totally don't believe in the propaganda. That's usually the case. That's usually the case. That's just a mechanism, and they play the game. And the fewer, I mean, the worse moral standard you have, the easier you can play any game, right? Um, Whether the party line is this or that, it doesn't matter, right, for you. So that's the worst, because that means that all of these systems where, oh, if you toe the party line, you get ahead eventually, even if they are the most saints. When the system begins, later on, it will be filled with the most horrendous people later on. So that's like one of the discussions, or I would say arguments, that we did with the the Occupy Wall Street people. So I went down there, and I'm like, some most of these people were genuine human beings who wanted to, um, have a different system, and thinking that they have the idea to change it all, right? And honest, good people. I'm not saying that they're bad people. I really like to talk with them and stay there. And the problem was that they were all utopian. Like, if they think that if you just put down the rules and you find the right people and you run by those rules, it cannot go wrong, right? But the very essence of if you told the rules, or if you have this opinion, you get ahead in their system, is bad in any system, because it's not the meritocracy, and it can be faked. It's very hard to fake um, capability of you selling stuff to others, because you have to find a genuine need, and you have to fill that need, right? There's no faking that. You have to produce value. As as bad as they said capitalism or whatever it is, it makes some good out of the worst attributes of a human being, right? Whereas their system relies on always finding saints who run the system. And as soon as you run out of saints, or people who don't really care about your ideology, just are in it for the power, eventually they will overpower the saints. And now you have the most horrendous corrupt system, with the most horrendous authoritarian system that you have built for the saints, which are no longer there. So it's horrible. Yeah. Human vegetable. You don't truly appreciate something until you lose it. That's what's happening generation and after generation and after generation. And the cycle is usually 10 generations. And after that, you have to restart, which is 250 years, right? What's your thoughts on stagflation? It's a good question. I mean, stagflation is very, very common. I think they come up with this. Stagflation is the default, I would say. So for some of the viewers, inflation is when prices go up, and but your eventually productivity follows and your wages go up as well. So your fixed pension is toast, but generally the country can get out of it without too much pain. Um, right, boomers. And you can actually even benefit if you bought your house at $5,000, right? Um, so that's inflation, right? Then there's deflation, and then there's stagflation. And stagflation is basically the losing of the living standard, which is based on return. It's returning to reality. Stagflation is when you lived beyond your means for too long, and now you have to fall back to your actual productivity. So, and you paid for it through inflation, right? So for me, like the term how they were thinking about stagflation is absolutely natural. When you go and you borrow too much, but nothing has improved, and you misspent the future's money that you took, right? That's stagflation. So I think it's very natural in these cases. And that was the communism. I mean, that was the issue with communism as well, that you were always expecting better and better, like from a communist perspective, right? Space travel, there we go, Yuri Gagarin, and so on. So you can borrow from the future because you always had to be optimistic, right? And every year the reports had to come in over X amount of productivity, and we overachieved like 120% achievements, blah, blah, blah. So I used to see those sheets from my father who worked in the factory, and it was always, almost always made up, and made eventually it became a joke. And I have to translate the joke in my head and then tell you one maybe next time. But basically, it became a joke that everybody in the factory has lied up the ladder, so the very end report that goes to the dictator looks good, right? And then based on that, you make predictions for the future, and then you overspend, eventually the whole thing collapses. Is that not what we have been doing, in the West? Whether it's capitalism, communism, it doesn't matter. As soon as the people who run the system are corrupt enough, they only care about how they put more of your productivity in their pocket for the short term, may the system be damned for the long run, whatever it is, right? So that stagflation is slowly, slowly going back to what where you are actually, right? And if you cannot go back slowly, um, paying with your inflation, paying through inflation, which eventually is diminishing living standards, falling back to a different economy, then a collapse happens. If you cannot sustain stagflation to come back to reality with the elevator or the stairs, then collapse happens, right? So that's my opinion on stagflation. That's very normal. That was normal for me. I didn't even knew it was something different. What was not normal for me was inflation without stagflation, right? That was not normal for me, which is again a bit different. For you can get out of stagflation if there's an economic boom, like maybe a winning party after a war. um, then you can just do inflation without stagflation, or a new energy source being discovered, or maybe AI being discovered, right? I'm just saying, if we can increase the productivity tenfold tomorrow, then we can stop stagflation, right? And just continue with inflation. But I think we're in stagflation. Papa John, Arpad, bless you, brother. Bless you too. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. And your question is, do you think we will have Canadian and Mexican black market goods here in the States? We already have Mexican good black market in the States. Every day I would walk past by in Los Angeles, going to the store. I would pass by a street where there was a Mexican black market for antibiotics to everything, basically. All the controlled substances, in the sense price controlled, not controlled as in illegal drugs or anything like that, but legal drugs in Mexico to treat symptoms were being smuggled into the US and being sold much cheaper. So if people had like uh, an illness or something, and they have fallen off the social ladder, and they could not afford that, they would look for the ingredients that their American version of the drugs were that they could no longer afford, and they would go to that market, compare, and do their best, right? And there's also tourism of like dentist tourism, I guess, whatever, surgically, plastic surgery tourism, and God help us all. But it's already here, no problem, and it has been here. It's just we don't necessarily know about it, or I knew about it but don't really use it. So it's already here. Yep. I don't know about Canadian. I haven't really lived close to the Canadian border in the States, but I bet that's the same. I bet that's the same. Um, I would say it starts with tourism in the sense of medical tourism and some other tourism, and you do this or do that. And then eventually that's a bit expensive. So people solve it for you so you don't have to go there, right? Um, yeah. So it's already here. It's gonna get bigger. To answer your question, when you were in Romania during hyperinflation, how much gold and or silver would you need to get by as a middle class? How much would that be today's market in America? Oh wow, it's hard to calculate because, but I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna do some answer, but basically it's hard to calculate because it's relative to each other. So basically, what you need to count is not dollar amounts, not Romanian lei amounts, but you have to pick one necessary item that you're gonna measure everything else in. Because if I say half an ounce of gold bought you an apartment in a nice, relatively, sorry, not even an apartment, a house in a safe, in the sense that, safe as it can be during those times, small town, not too far from a city where you can go back and do business or sell your goods. That means amazing. All you need is 2 ounces of gold, right? And you buy all the houses that you need. But if you're starving, then you will need to sell that house for food. And well, now how many cans of soup does that buy? Maybe it's just two bags of food, right? So if I say, okay, you need X amount of gold for real estate, but food have might have been inflated, 1,000 times. If gold inflates maybe 2,000 times, but food inflates 1,000 times, then technically you're better off now purchasing food with your gold instead of doing food purchases with your gold then. So what you first and foremost you need is food safety and well, safety in general, right? So you need to be as much self-sufficient or prepped for the future as much as possible. And after that, we can talk about how much gold or how much silver you need. Because if not, we can come up with a number, but how bad is the food situation going to be, or the security situation going to be in the local place where you are in, right? So think about like how much, if you are in Kharkiv or somewhere in Ukraine, right? How much of your gold you would pay to get out of there? It might not be enough, or might be all of it. You don't care. So first and foremost, you have to make sure that you don't get into bad situations based on location, based on food security, based on like general physical security and everything else. And after that, we can do some calculations. So given that that's done for you, um, I don't necessarily did this calculation, but other calculations per real estate, how you can keep your real estate. I think I even shared a spreadsheet at some point with some members on Buy Me a Coffee. I don't know. But basically, you need to cover your 1 year mortgage. That's the minimum. So if you have enough to cover 1 year of mortgage right now with the precious metals you have, that will be enough to kind of save the real estate during in my opinion, based on my calculations, right? um through the early part, the worst part. And after that, because gold inflates later, so first the bad things happen, it hits the fan, but gold might still not be as up as you would like it to be, right? And if you have to start selling, then it's not as much towards the first peak than the die-off period and the second peak of precious metals during a hyperinflationary cycle. So so that's why I say usually, okay, if your mortgage is $1,000 a month, then the minimum is you need to have is $12,000 worth of gold, right? So if you have that, I think you're gonna be okay, right? Now, where do you have that? Do you have it with you? Bad idea. Do you have it somewhere else? Better idea. Do you have it in a different jurisdiction, but you can still get to that? You know, again, it's all relative. You have to come up with your own numbers, but that's a calculation I did to kind of generalize. Um, yeah. I hope this answered some of your question. I bet we could do some more calculations, but I think that's the minimum to keep what you have. So Benoit totally agrees about realpolitik versus utopia. Any do-gooder can build a socialist dogma, and the application of it will hurt its nose on the wall of reality. However, capitalism too isn't a utopia. Yeah, I would say so. What we need is high morals that come from culture, because if you have moral people, high moral people who all produce more than what they consume, then you can have any system. Then who cares if you have communism? You can make it work. You can make anything work, because it's the people. It's not the system. The the main difference is, in my opinion, is that um, capitalism can work with a higher degree of non-producing people because it starts pushing them down, and then they either get motivated faster to produce, or they get really pushed down and nobody cares, unfortunately. um, Whereas socialism tries to fix that by taking from other places, right? And eventually the number of managers in a socialist or communist system um, is way too high to manage the wealth, instead of let the wealth naturally flow in the direction. However, as soon as you have non-moral people, both are corrupted. So it doesn't matter, because as soon as in capitalism government weds corporates, or the corporatism, it becomes basically fascism. So it doesn't matter, but we still call it capitalism. But technically it should be just an economic system. But as soon as you merge it into government, what we have then, it's very important to understand the following. What we have then is an inner religious war. So when we talk about Europe and the times of the war between Catholics and Protestant in Germany and some other places, and bad things happening, or even England, right? That was just the same. That was it was just mixed in with religion, right? But technically, whether you believe in this economic system or that economic system, now that's the new religion. If you believe in wokeism, it's really a religion. It's not, or you believe in freedom, it's a religion. That's a belief that you have. Now, whether that's God is taken out of the question or not, that's a different question, but it's still religion. It's just a godless religion. So, what we have today is religious wars, inner religious wars, right? So once you understand that, you can have a clearer picture. Because if you think that in Germany the Protestants were killing the Catholics because of God, you're wrong. It was because of power, right? But because of the cultural system that they lived under, whatever they had, the authority had to come from God. That was included into the system or into their system. But it was never about whose God is stronger, whose dad can beat who, right? It was about power. It's just they had to draw power from somewhere, so they don't feel that they are evil, basically. So what we have is godless religious systems fighting each other. However, none of it works if we don't have the right leadership. And leadership is failing, or we could say there is no leadership. Yes, the Dodd-Frank regulations. So removing those. You could argue, ideally, we would want a world where we don't need regulations. So technically, if you would have no regulations at all, then it could work. It could work only with, again, a different culture. But as the culture is decaying, you need regulations as Dodd-Frank, I would say. Now, do I want a world where we don't need Dodd-Frank regulations? Yes. But doing away with it was probably a bad idea. And again, and that can be coming from Republicans or Democrats or the Uni Party, right? It doesn't matter. All politic is bought and paid for. James West, I'm sorry to hear. Yeah, he says just got laid off with a lot of coworkers. Do you think the recession is official yet? Thank God out of debt and emergency fund. Man, I'm sorry to hear that. Um, yeah, I don't know what to say. I'm pretty sure you're a capable guy and you'll figure something out. But yeah, I didn't even know that you can just fake a recession not being here until this this administration did it. So now I know. Now everything that I believed in got confirmed, right? That we're living in the Soviet states, because numbers are made up and rules are being added as we go. As long as you can print the right words on the right paper, people don't care. I don't know. I think I think it's gonna get worse, and eventually, um, they'll just blame it on an event that is yet to happen. That's what I think. Usually, an event happens during these times. So, yeah. So that was the cause for what you're gonna experience now. Just how Putin was the cause of inflation, even though um, you know the time table didn't quite fit the narrative. Yeah, I hope you can come out of it stronger afterwards. Yeah, let me know. But maybe maybe you can start your own company. Although this is probably not the time. You want to start from a position of power instead of a position of desperation. But if you're not desperate at all, then maybe you can find holes to fill or holes to make. Labor is the source of all value. I somewhat disagree with that in the sense of labor is a tool. I think creativity is some source of value, but not all the source of value. Value is in your head, right? But I know what you're getting at. I don't want to get like, oh, but my philosophy doesn't doesn't subscribe to that. Then let me go off on a tangent to philosophize on something that you could not express in one sentence, right? So I understand what you're saying, and I do believe that eventually the very end thing before it becomes value, it has to involve labor. And I agree with that part. It's just I'm saying that value is really defined in our heads, and creativity and I guess scientific achievements, right? Um, is what we need first, and then labor to achieve the outcome of that, right? Because if you don't know that you can smelt copper, the copper ore for you in the ground has no value. But as soon as you have that knowledge and you come out and into the Bronze Age, right, then suddenly that hill over there is really valuable for you, right? And eventually you need labor to produce that. But it became from, I think, what we need now in order to, and I think we're on the beginning of it. Like we could be on the beginning of a new era, whether that's energy era or some other era. It will happen. I think that's the reason why the CBDCs and the control system is being pushed too hard, because if we step into the new era with a relative freedom, then that will be amplified. Um, but if we step into the new era with the total control system, then the control system can keep you still running the buses, and I use that phrase as it can keep you preoccupied, because we're getting to the point where the people who think that they run the world are thinking that they no longer need you, right? So in many cases, and I have heard this in in a really good monologue of a YouTube person, that many jobs are becoming irrelevant, or in the sense of useless jobs that you could technically do away with and still keep the same level of value of the product or value of the service. And I subscribe to some degree to this, that many jobs are there to keep you busy so you don't revolt or you don't bring in a new era where those who are in control now might not be might not be in control in the new era. I just don't know whether that's energy related or whether it's philosophy or religion related, but I do feel a shift is upon us. And I think the past system, which really started after the Second World War, is going to be do away with one way or another. And because they need a new paradigm. and some event between 25 and 35, 2025 and 2035, that will define the next 100 years. So there's that. Arpad, I'm curious, in your opinion, where are the countries where it's a good place to reside in a coming chaos? In my I am ho. It's often, in my honest opinion, it's often better to run than to stay under crappy conditions for 5, 7 years. I agree with you in the sense that if you have the capability and there's no some type of loyalty holding you back, that you made an oath or something like that to, then going away, or you can because you don't have family that you have to take care of, going to the better place is 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 easier. So I can definitely agree on that. The issue is, if you keep on always going to the next place, the problem will follow you, whether you or your children, because it is sad that if you don't face the issues now, your children will have to face them. So you have to think about that. But that doesn't mean that you have to stay in a crappy city that you're afraid for your life, or in a country that is actively seeking to devalue you based on things that you have no control over. So I agree on that. I would say that the countries that um, have a pro life culture, so, and I'm saying this not necessarily in the sense of abortions or anything like that, but in the sense that still has a homogeneous culture that wants to keep its culture. So those will be the countries that have the best chance, because a suicidal culture is going to be part of the collapse, just like how in Rome or in Greece or any other culture before us. It's basically an overripe fruit ready to be harvested, I guess, by a different culture and a coming culture that will take over. Usually, that's the case. So look for countries that value strongly their culture, and the population is homogeneous enough to sustain that, and geographically is positioned by countries, physically by countries who think likely. And you have to go pretty far, to be honest. So you have to go now away from Eastern Europe into probably countries like, and I'm not going to move there, but if you want to fill these criterias, it might not be best for you because you may be not part of their culture, right? But like if you think about countries, and I guess open the map here, but maybe some Asian countries, or Tajikistan or Uzbekistan, or some countries that are have a very well defined culture and were kind of left out of the major conflicts, but have not yet really taken off, in the sense have not really become first world countries that we think of, first world countries when we think about freedoms. Because based on what type of freedom you want to live out, some countries that are not part of the Western world will have, even though the freedoms are not encoded, um, you may have a better chance of living those types of freedom out there. In the sense, if you want freedom of speech, even though that's encoded, right, in the United States, um, the technicality of it is becoming really hard, right? The technicality through the control of big media and big corporations and um, big tech, right? Suddenly, if you have an unpopular opinion, it doesn't matter if the government doesn't come after you, right? It can be almost just as bad, right? Think about like how fast people get deplatformed, right? And how their life changes if they come up with the wrong ideas or express something. um, there will be other charges against them, you know. From if they can't find a jaywalk, then they will find something else, right? And eventually they will find something, right? And it's not because of that, and you know it's not because of that, but it's because you are expressing opinions that are unpopular. And you can confirm that by the double standard, right, that we have. But if you want to express freedom, you know, if you go to Uzbekistan and you want to express freedom of, let's just say, Western style freedom of parading through a city, or reading story hour, whatever, in libraries, maybe you won't be able to express those type of freedoms. So I think that's what multipolar world means, that you used to be able to do everything in one place, but now the values and the cultures are shifting in such a direction that unfortunately there's no one place where you can have it all. So I guess based on your values, the minimum you should do is at least change states. Um, because if you live in Seattle, it's going to be totally different than in Florida when it comes to gun rights, for example, right? So, and that's sad to be honest, but it's because the previous two generations have failed to pass the value system that they inherited. And I think, yeah, so this is hard, but that's where you have failed, and that's where we have failed, right? The value systems that you have inherited were so good that you took it for granted, and you thought that it doesn't need to be passed along. So somebody else raised your children for you, and now you're going to be reaping the benefits of that. Jerry Dwyer says, I really enjoy how you answer questions, discuss issues, example capitalism versus communism, answer morals. Yes, because inherently every system is going to have a flaw, right? Every system is going to have a flaw, but some system works better with flawed people, and some systems don't work well with flawed people. So it wants to get rid of flawed people, right? With flaws, and it's just one can be okay with relative freedoms, the other one needs to kind of get rid of those. Um, yeah, and there's different types of communism, because um, the communism that was started in, right, that was, well, not really started, but the people experienced in Romania in 1955 was totally different communism that people experienced in 1995. Both were communism. Both had the same pictures of, you know, Marx or whatever in the classroom. It doesn't matter, but the style of communism was very different. So you cannot compare just how capitalism is different in the United States than in New Zealand, right? Um, when it comes to freedoms, right? Especially after the Rona. So what I'm saying, when Ceausescu introduced, I think he called it national communism, I believe. I have to double check how to translate that into English, but somebody do a search on Wikipedia for it. It was totally different. Like, you had to sing the national anthem every morning in school, right? You had to put your hands on your heart, and so on and so forth. And the people who were attracted to their own gender got sent away into happy camps, down to the Danube Delta to work there, which they fail to mention when they talk about the wonders of communism. So it's different, and it look, everything can work if we're good people and everybody follows morals. But if not, then there's no system that we can build, right? And eventually, any system that we build will become a jail to kind of enforce the morals that are being pushed from the so-called leaders down, right? And the new morals, what is the new morals? That what you misgender someone on YouTube and you get demonetized, right? That's a new moral. So those are the moral standards that we are pushing down, right? And I'm not saying like express your opinion about this in the comment section. It's useless. I'm saying that the system is always trying to push down the moral system that it perceives as it needs for its own survival, to push it down to you, right? And that was totally different when, maybe 50 years ago, right? Or 60 years ago, if we go back to 1950s America, right? It had a different, it was also propaganda. I'm not saying there was no propaganda back then. It was, the propaganda was different, right? The value system that was being pushed down to the people was different, right? But I do believe that at that point, the culture wanted to survive, whether now it's expressing tendencies that the late Roman Empire was expressing, when the leadership is so corrupt that they are suicidal, they're culturally suicidal, right? Um, but of course, that is projected outwards, right? The leaders' suicidal tendencies of not valuing what they have inherited are being expressed in a way where that's being projected down to the people who actually provide for them, we the people, right? And then, I mean, it's very common, if you have lived, and you don't have to like say leaders, if you have lived a very good life, and let's say things were provided for you, right? In an upper middle class existence, right? Many of the young people who go then explore the world, whether that's college, university, or just explore the world, they have this remorse of having it too good, right? Of having it too good. So now they want to solve the thing that, oh, they want to solve poverty. Never mentioned that they never experienced poverty. They forced themselves to experience poverty. That's why many young, I guess, college graduates live a hobo style life, that they think, of course, they don't have to really worry about existence, whether that's through the availability of, or used to be the availability of, cheap credit, or still having their parents having a good nest egg and so on. They don't really have to um, worry about, their sustenance, let's just say. But they choose a hobo lifestyle, right, to sort of experience this fake poverty so they can identify with the people who truly need help. And they feel the need then of taking the poor people under their spiritual arms and express sympathy for them, whether that's fake or whether that's for kind of, what was the world, the word, mm, I guess sympathy, to express sympathy for them, to pose, right? And that's just like regular upper middle class young people. Imagine how a totally corrupted leadership class feels. They immediately have to divide their lower classes into enemies of themselves, of enemies and allies, right? And now they have to make up problems and solve the problems of the needy poor, right, in their own way. So that's something to think about. Arsenal Rain says only tangible assets make the transition to the new value on the other side of 2032. Nothing digital will make that transition. Well, in case we have a solar flare, that's for sure. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah, so I do believe you have to base your existence on tangible things, not digital things. I do agree with that. Um, because there's a lot of digital promises coming up. I'm not saying you cannot utilize the digital products or digital currencies or whatever you um, if it serves you, right? But basing your existence or your well-being on digital promises is absolutely crazy. All right. Well, I think that's for today. So unless you can quickly shoot another question for me to read, um, that will be it. I guess the great FOMO asked the question, and he did it with the capital question. So let me read that. How did healthcare hospital jobs fare during hyperinflation? Did most hospitals go bust, or did they survive? So, the fact of the matter is that we had, to some degree, a level of free healthcare, even during communism and after communism. The issue with that is, of course, you cannot provide things for free for a long time. So, um, eventually, the quality of the free healthcare was so bad that a second layer of non-free healthcare was built on top of it. So the wait time for the free health stuff was so bad that you could not utilize it, right? That was even during communism. And then the healthcare workers for the free healthcare, the pay was so bad that they either just picked a different profession or became corrupt. So you had to pay whether you were using the free healthcare or whether you were using the paid healthcare anyway. And eventually It was the corrupt free healthcare where you had to pay anyway to directly to the doctors or providers, um, was established, right? And that was already in communism. So we had a continuation of that in healthcare, where the healthcare workers basically had no pay whatsoever, and they were provided for by the people who they cared for. And that's why I bring up like memories of being um, in the hospital and seeing people carrying live chickens, right, in the waiting rooms, right, because that was the pay for the doctor visit. And that's how many healthcare workers survived, that through these legal, half illegal donations and payments that were provided. So by the time, the doctor or healthcare worker would would go home, he would need someone to help carry the stuff for food and, sacks of apples, this and that. And it was good. Technically, relatively speaking, it was good, but it did not pay the rent. You know what I'm saying? It's They were like, compared to other professions, it wasn't the worst, but they were solely relying on other people paying them with the type of currency um, or value that they could provide for the healthcare that they provided. And that became an interesting dynamic, because then the people who were directly involved with the patients got paid more than the doctors who had the papers and who had the knowledge and so on and so forth. Because in the end, like, if somebody was in the in the hospital for a longer time, technically there's a nurse who's taking care of you, right? Even though the doctor is prescribing the medication or something like that, even if they had it, many times they didn't even have it, right? So they would send you home. But anyway, the sometimes the envelopes were fatter, let's just say, for the nurses who actually did the care, the day-to-day care, instead of the doctor, who in normal times would have a much higher pay. So in many cases, it was it's kind of weird, because it was like a mafia system where the patient paid the nurse, and the nurses sort of gave some shares or something to the higher ups. Or you could have directly have an envelope, one for the doctor and one for the nurse, right? And you would ask them to pass this to the doctor or something like that. But many times it wasn't like, oh, a big pile of cash that you can live off of for the rest of the month or anything like that. It was like, okay, a half a bag of potatoes or something like that, or, you know 2 pounds of potatoes or something like that. And it was weird because everybody had to carry their own stuff into the hospitals, because the hospitals were low staffed, because anyone with two brain cells who were working in these hospitals um, would just leave the country, right? They could easily get a job somewhere else in Western Europe, hopefully, even if not in their same profession, but they could do something, so they would leave. So only the worst and the most corrupt remained, right? And everything was being sold. So things like gauzes or medication, they would write you on a piece of paper what you need, but it was up to you how to get it. Or syringes or something like that, you would have your friends, your family get it for you and bring it into the hospital, and then you could use it, or you could sell it there in the hospital. So that's how you could yeah, so you would need a whole network of people outside that they could help you while you were disabled for something. So many people just opted not to go to hospitals at all, right? And just treated somewhere else or treated differently, right? So I remember, my father stitching in wounds, or he was never trained for that, but um, you know, or disinfecting, or people just treating each other, and having always like some person who could treat trauma or other stuff. And with unfortunately, like now with the prepping and everything we have now, you actually have kits for these. But imagine you have to bend your own needle because you don't have a specialized needles to do that, right? And disinfecting it with fire. And this I saw, like, it was interesting back then. Yeah, it was it was next level stuff, to be honest. Now that the stuff, like, you would disinfect with vodka or something like that. Yeah, it wasn't rosy, let's just put it that way. What was the one item people wanted the most? I mean, yeah, I would have to make a list and let me see which one they wanted the most. I think it was different per people. It was different per person, I would say. But are you thinking about as a trading good that you could always trade for something else? I think that wasn't most wanted, but you could always trade it, right? Yeah, okay. So I think actually powdered milk was something like that. Powdered milk was something like that. Baby, I guess not necessarily baby formula, but powdered milk. Um, because you could always have something for that. You could always trade it, but you could always just have a person have it, or you would prepare food from it. There were many times where you had some very basic stuff that you would have to eat, and like grown-ups, who had nothing else to eat, they could always just do something with the powdered milk. So that was one. Also, cans of tuna. If you can do cans of tuna, that was really good. I would say alcohol, but there was so much misery around alcohol that I don't want to say it. Um, yeah. I mean, there were more. I even at some point made a list. I'll I'll probably do another list and do a video about them. Um, but yeah, for in our case in the family, because we 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 provided for ourselves. It was gloves. I remember working gloves was of very high value. Gloves and working boots, right? But to be honest, tools that you can make tools with was very high in demand, right? So tools that you can make other tools with was very high demand. Yep. Well, thank you very much, Arsenal Rain. Yeah, nice talking to you guys. Hopefully, I will try to do my best to do a video or a live at least every week, even if they're going to be shorter ones. Because I honestly feel things have accelerated in this last couple of weeks just by the crackdowns on people who really were not even a threat to some. Well, maybe they were. I mean, ideas are threats now, I guess, to systems. But yeah, the changes that I see is showing desperation in the leadership class, what they think as leadership class. And that means that I think we might come to a point where things will change suddenly. And I feel that's going to be kind of, let's just say, something that they can say, oh, because of this event, right, things need to change. So, yeah, let's keep in touch at least once a week. I don't like the news items are like the bank failures again, or yeah, prominent people being pushed to the nether lands of the internet or something like that. All right. Talk to you later. Thank you very much. I hope the sound quality got better, and see you next time.